What's up guys, this is Preheat. So today's video is going to be a level 70 guide for Devastation Evoker in Dragonflight. And apologies in advance for this video, my voice is a little rough today, I'm not feeling well, but we're just going to power through this. So just to start things off with the basics. So if you're playing Devastation Evoker in the pre-patch, you're playing a very watered down version of the class. And what you're playing right now is just not really a good indication of what's going to be like in Dragonflight. And this is primarily because you're missing Burnout, you're missing other important talents, and you're missing Feed of Flames or Ever-Burning Flame, both of which are pretty important talents. Every class is missing talents at level 60, but every other class has Capstone Legendaries, whereas Devastation Evoker just doesn't have that, right? So obviously that puts us at a bit of a disadvantage, but obviously it doesn't matter because Dragonflight's literally in 2 days, right? So to start things off, I want to talk about the general stat priority for how you want to gear your character. So obviously, you can't choose exactly what stats you get, right? Like you get 2 stats on the piece of loot, and it really is just kind of luck of the draw and what you end up getting to drop for you, right? But you want to kind of prioritize item level, but mastery is also very, very important. So in terms of stats, right, you're going to want to go mastery first and foremost, and then with mastery, you're going to want either crit or haste. Haste is going to be the better option, generally speaking, but crit can also be pretty good. It just kind of depends on what your gear setup is, but generally you want to prefer haste over crit. And then versatility is going to be your least important stat. Now, obviously for versatility, if you're in a situation where you're dying because you're taking too much damage or you're PvPing, then the value of versatility goes up quite a bit, right? But, you know, generally speaking, you want to avoid versatility. So this is my character on the beta right now, and I'm trying to get this in before they close up the beta. So as you can see here, my item level is actually 396 here. This is just showing my bags. So I've got a lot of mastery here, right? Bunch of my stats in mastery, and then I've got you know, haste at 18% of my stat weights, and then crit at around 10%, versatility about 3%. So this is just what I have as my setup, right? This isn't necessarily what would be best for everyone. This is just what I've been playing in Mythic Plus and all that. But as you can see, a lot of mastery, right? Mastery is my most important stat. This is where I have pretty much all of my stat budget. And then haste and crit are kind of splitting the difference there. And then I have some verse from my Horn of Valor, which is actually a really good trinket for you. But obviously you won't be able to pick this trinket up until season 1 starts, right? Okay, so moving on from the stats, we have our tier bonus, and our tier bonus isn't like that special, but it does give us lust increase time, right? So if we have the chance to proc here, it says empower your spells have a 25% chance to grant you 6 seconds of Fury of the Aspects. If you already have lust up, it's just going to extend your lust. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it overriding or anything like that. It's just generally all around good. And then obviously you have the 5% increased chance to crit, and then increased chance to crit after you use your empowers, which just makes empowering spells even more important, right? And then moving on from there, I'm going to highlight this even though it's a crafted piece, just because I feel like it's pretty important. So some crafted pieces can have a special bonus. They're called embellished. And this is one that just like comes on the item. It's a jewel crafting neck. I recommend everyone get this neck unless they nerf it. Basically what this neck does is it just gives you a chance to proc your gym stats, depending on which stats your gyms have in your neck, right? And you can have up to 3 in your neck. And each one of these procs is completely separate, right? They don't share the same ICD or anything like that. They're all just separate. So you want to have 3 different gyms in your neck. That way you can get your haste buff, your mastery buff, and your crit buff, right? So that's what's happening here. I'm getting my crit buff from this guy. I'm getting my haste buff, and I'm getting my mastery buff. And these are all going to proc separately. I could have this be the purple one where it's like haste mastery, right? Instead, if I wanted to, but I just didn't put that one in. But yeah, very, very good neck. Make sure you're using this. And if you're using it, make sure you have 3 different kinds of gems in it, or else you're kind of wasting it. And then evokers have their own special staff. So this staff has an on use where basically you lift the staff up and then you shoot a beam and it does damage. It says it benefits from mastery, but that's a lie right now. It'll probably be hotfixed later. But I imagine that once they hotfix this, you'll probably want to use it on the pole. And then on like a 5-minute fight, you'd probably use your last one during like the very end of your Dragon Rage at the very end of the fight. Or maybe, you know, you would just use it on cooldown. I'm not really sure because it doesn't really work properly yet. As of right now, it just scales with versatility. But this is just a really nice bonus. And the staff itself, like, even though it's bugged right now and it doesn't even work with mastery, it's still really, really good. Like, a heroic version of this staff is going to beat out a mythic staff. So if you're, you know, going into heroic week and you're trying to get your hands on this thing, I imagine it's only going to get better from here, right? Once they actually fix the mastery buff on it. All right, so moving on to trinkets, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there are a lot of really, really good trinkets for Evoker. I'm just going to highlight like the big ones. So Horn of Valor is a really, really good trinket because it lasts 30 seconds and your cooldown is about 40 seconds. So you can use double on use if you don't have Horn of Valor, that's fine. Or you can just use like Horn of Valor plus the Feather. I think it's a really good setup. Other good trinkets, right, from like Mythic 0 week are like Spoils. This can be a mastery bonus. That's why I recommend trying to roll on it. It's 2-minute cooldown. Perfect, right? And then you've also got Iridus Fragment, which is also 20 seconds. Mastery on it, which is really, really great. But obviously 3-minute cooldown, not so great. So you'd use this as like a double on use setup, right? Iridus Fragment plus Spoils is really good. And then, yeah, dungeon trinkets, like even this healer trinket's good. These are all like within 1% a healer trinket. I have Scovald, Infernal Writ. They're all really good. Dark Moon card, though, is also fantastic for us. And if you're going to build this, make sure that you put your Dark Moon deck no longer shuffles when ace is drawn card in there, because that makes it basically always guaranteed ace, right? So that's going to be like the best trinkets you can get. Obviously, there's going to be more information on trinkets later. This is just to kind of get you started off. If you want more information on trinkets, I feel like this is probably a good time to bring this up. I also have a Wowhead guide that I've been writing. And at the time I'm talking, it's not available right now, but it will be available later, and I will include it in the description below. So if you don't see it right now, just come back later and it should be back. But it has like these cheat sheets where it shows you like the talents, gives you like the rundown on the stat weights, right? Shows you like which trinkets are best for Mythic 0 week, weapons, etc., etc. And there's more information in here later, but yeah, it'll be updated with all the latest information. If you're ever looking for like more extensive information, right? A YouTube video is going to be out of date as soon as Blizzard makes like a single change. Whereas the Wowhead guide is always going to be up to date, because I will make sure that I update it as soon as I can, right? So just always defer to the Wowhead guide whenever you need to. You know, obviously if you prefer the video content, that's fine too, right? Just make sure that you're checking out the guide. Okay, so moving on from there, we have our talents, and I talked about this a lot in the Wowhead guide if you want to check that out. But I'm just going to go over like my Mythic Plus build that I've been running. So this is my Mythic Plus build. I've got the decreased cooldown on the knockup. You're really good at Mythic Plus as an Invoker. You've got a lot of stops. You've got your stun, you've got your tail sweep, tail swipe, you've got your wing buffet, you've got oppressing roar to make other people CC better, right? These are all fantastic tools. Definitely make sure you're making use of them. Also stuff that's situational, right? Like Colorizing Flame. I'd say Zephyr is like all around good. I would say probably always run this in Mythic Plus. But Aerial Mastery I would actually consider optional, because you don't really need Aerial Mastery in Mythic Plus that much, because you're kind of doing a lot more AoE, right? Like a lot more pyres, instant cast, stuff like that. But it is nice. So I would say like probably still take it. But you don't necessarily have to have it, right? Like if you want to put this talent somewhere else, like overall, for instance, for like Raging, totally fine. And then on the DPS side, I'd say that this is like pretty much the setup you want to run, except for this one last point here. So you pretty much have one point to kind of flex around wherever you want. But everything else is pretty much set in stone, I would say. So sometimes I like to go Shattering Star here for like cleave dungeons. Like Jade Temple is a good example of that, or like Shadow Moon, Burial Grounds, right? Those are really good for cleave. So Shattering Star is pretty good there. For like more AoE heavy stuff like Academy, I'd probably put this into Titanic Wrath, or perhaps Firestorm if I really hate myself and I want to deal with the tank running out of it, right, constantly, because that's what's going to happen. Every time it seems like tanks always run out of Firestorm. But anyways, yeah, probably Titanic Wrath in that case. You could also put it into Catalyze for like Tyrannical Week. This is just going to be more boss damage, right? So that's always good. And it's just passive, so you don't even have to worry about it. And then obviously other stuff is fine too, but really those are the main things I would recommend. So either Shattering Star, right, and Cleave, Catalyze for single target, Titanic Wrath for just like general AoE stuff. And then if you're really, really in love with Firestorm, then maybe go Firestorm. But personally, I don't like this talent. It's just such a small radius that like stuff just runs out of it instantly. So it's really annoying. But yeah, that's pretty much the setup here. And then for like pure single target, it's a little bit different. So obviously don't go pure single target unless it's actually pure single target, right? But this is the setup here. Basically, you have all of the single target stuff, and you'll notice I also have a point here in Innate Magic. You could actually pull out Leaping Flames too, and put this one over here as well, and Protracted Talons. Probably put this somewhere else as well. Yeah, and like pure single target, you don't really need to worry about these guys, right? But yeah, I mean, this talent's like pretty weak, so I wouldn't really care too much about picking it up. But anyways, so on the pure single target side, we're going to want to go this setup right here where we've got Hoarded Power, we've got Catalyze, we've got Focusing Iris, right? All this good stuff. We do not have Eternity Span. Eternity Span is going to be one of those talents where like if you're ever even 2-target, make sure you have this talent, okay? Like do not skip this talent if it's 2-target, ever. And you'd probably just pull out like Focusing Iris, or you might even pull out Hoarded Power for this. I'm not really sure. It could also just be Titanic Wrath as well. There's a lot of ways you can play this, right? I'd say Titanic Wrath is probably the safest one to drop. of the three. But yeah, another one that's pretty good in like 2 or 3 targets, even if the 2 or 3 targets only spawn like every 2 minutes, is Charge Blast. You don't even have to press Pyre for this talent to be good, because it actually affects your Dragon Rage ones. So like if you have AoE that happens every 2 minutes and only every 2 minutes and nowhere else in the fight, this is still going to be an insane talent, because it's just going to make your Pyres do twice as much damage, right? So just a really great talent. And then if you're wanting to move this maybe up to, let's say like we're going to go 3 target or higher like that, right? What I would probably do here is we would skip out on the Power Nexus and then probably go something more like this. Okay, so yeah, something like this. So we'd have Volatility. Volatility, if it's every 3 target and you're able to actually hit them with Pyre, make sure you have this talent. It's very good. Very strong talent. So we'd be skipping out on Focusing Iris and Titanic Wrath. No big deal there. Obviously, you could change into the Interrupt one if you wanted to, but for the most part, the rest of this is kind of what I would stick with. Obviously, Catalyze is like single target, so if you're doing a lot of Pyres, maybe don't pick this one up. Maybe go for Focusing Iris instead, or even perhaps Arcane Vigor if you prefer that playstyle. It's pretty good in AoE because you get back in essence from this, right? But yeah, something like this is probably going to do best in like 3 targets. And then for like even more AoE, you can spec into Onyx Legacy. That's probably the next one you want to grab. It's just really great, right? But obviously, if there's not AoE every minute, then it loses a lot of value. But that's pretty much it for like how you want to do your talents. And of course, if you want more information on the talents, be sure to check out the guide, including my leveling build, because the leveling build has some talents that you definitely want to pick up, like Exuberance for leveling. There's also like Forger of Mountains is really good, Landslide cooldown for leveling. Enveloping Blow, fantastic for leveling. There's a lot of stuff that's like really good for leveling that you wouldn't normally take. So definitely go check that out if you want more information there. Okay, so in terms of how to play Evoker, in the most simple terms, you're pretty much just keeping your Fire Breath up on the target. And there's 2 main builds for how you do this. It's going to be Feed the Flames or Ever-Burning Flame. Both builds do the same thing. It's just about how they do it, right? So for Ever-Burning Flame, you do it by extending your dot. And this is going to be better if you're doing like Sustained Cleave, or like a target is like never moving, right? Because you have to use Firestorm in single target. And then Feed the Flames is going to be like the more, I would say, useful spec all around, right? Like this is what I recommend for single target, even though they're both really close. The reason I recommend Feed the Flames more is obviously, you know, Firestorm. You don't have to have Firestorm as Feed the Flames. But yeah, for Feed the Flames, you just basically have a reduced cooldown on your Fire Breath, and that's how you keep Fire Breath up. So overall, it's like you use Dragon Rage, you maintain your Fire Breath, you use Showering Star to amplify your Disintegrate damage and Eternity Surge damage. You use Eternity Surge on cooldown, right? Regardless of if you have Showering Star up, just send it on cooldown. And then in AoE, obviously, you're using Pyre, and then in single target and cleave, 2 target cleave, you're going to use Disintegrate, and then you're generating Essence Burst, which either your Azure Strike in 3 targets, or you're using Living Flame in 2 targets. And for the first Dragon Rage of the fight, because you do get the full benefits of Mastery during Dragon Rage, you can delay it, but I don't recommend delaying it if you have Lust on the pull, right? Which is the common case, right? Like most of the time you lust the pull. So if you're lusting the pull, then make sure that you are not delaying Dragon Rage. And if you are lusting the pull, then you can start delaying Dragon Rage. So for Mastery, you do get the full benefit of Mastery during your Dragon Rage and your Deep Breath. So there's like a best case and a worst case scenario, right? And this is assuming that you aren't bloodlusting the pull. So worst case would be like you use it on the pull and then it basically isn't up at the end of the fight. And then best case would be you delay it perfectly so that the end of the fight happens like right after your Dragon Rage falls off. This is ideal, right? So obviously you want to shoot for this, but even if you go for this, it's still not that big of a deal, right? It's not that huge of a difference, but it is something to min-max. Okay, so before we get started on the actual rotation, there's 2 terms we need to get out of the way so that, you know, moving forward, you understand what I'm meaning whenever I say these words. So the number 1 is chaining. So chaining refers to whenever you cast 2 Disintegrates in a row and you do not lose any ticks, right? So if I'm in this situation right here and I cast Disintegrate and then I recast right after this tick right here, and I let this one fully play out, this is chaining Disintegrate and I don't lose any ticks doing this, okay? Now, if you interrupt it, right, or you chain too early because you're like aggressively chaining, then that could be clipping it, right? Clipping means you lost a tick. So if I can get an Essence Burst proc real quick here, come on. Okay, so this right here is clipping because we're going to lose a tick every time. So due to time constraints, I'm going to save the full explanation for clipping versus chaining for a future video. But just know that like if you're in execute and the target's health is really, really low, there's value in extending your Dragon Rage further, even if it's not necessarily optimal DPS, just because you get more uptime on Dragon Rage. And I have examples of where I've done 50 seconds in single target with Lust. So if you have like a late Lust and it's like an execute phase that's very, very important, this would obviously be something that you'd want to do. But otherwise, I would say probably just go for like 2 Eternity Surge, 2 Fire Breath per Dragon Rage. That might involve some clipping depending on your haste. But for the most part, if you don't want to really worry about it, if you just stack a bunch of haste, it isn't really that big of a concern. The clipping stuff is really just if you want to go to extreme levels for like 50, or if you're just like high crit and you're low haste. So yeah, I mean, just go haste and, you know, wait for my future video to explain this part. Okay, so in terms of an opener, you're going to precast Living Flame into Shattering Star, and then you're going to Dragon Rage. Now keep in mind, you will delay Dragon Rage if you're not Bloodlusty on the pull, but I'm going to assume that you are in most cases. Doesn't really change much if you don't anyways. Yeah, so you Dragon Rage, and then you're going to immediately cast Fire Breath into Eternity Surge, and then you're going to try and spend your Essence in your Essence Burst with Disintegrate, right? Because this is a single target, and you're going to be chaining those casts, right? So you're going to be avoiding the clipping, chaining them. We'll talk about clipping later. And then as soon as you get a Burnout proc with that Leaping Flames, you're going to use that instant cast Living Flame so that you get 2 Essence Bursts, and you're going to spend those just the same as well, right? And the name of the game here is pretty much just use your cooldowns on cooldown. Use Shattering Star whenever you have at least 2 Essence and 2 Essence Burst, or if you have 1 Essence Burst and 5 Essence, that's fine too. And use Fire Breath on cooldown, use Eternity Surge on cooldown, and then for the last Eternity Surge or Fire Breath, you're going to want to use Tip the Scales. And the reason why I like to delay it for the end there, and you don't really have to, but the reason I like to delay it for the end is because in a lot of situations, you'll end up like unable to cast it if you have to cast it normally. But if you have it with Tip the Scales, then you're able to get it off in time. So that's why I would say like try and save Tip the Scales for later on, just because it generally makes it easier to fit it in later on as opposed to earlier. But you know, this is just a matter of preference. And then of course, as Dragon Rage ends, try to get 2 Essence Bursts, right? By you know, just using Azure Strike twice or using Living Flame twice. As you can see from this example, I basically had Fire Breath ready, and this is without doing any sort of clipping. So like if I had even done just the slightest amount of clipping, I would have been able to get at least 6 seconds more of Dragon Rage. So this just kind of gives you an idea of like the power of doing just a little clipping in there. In most cases, RNG willing, it's going to allow you to have a little bit longer of a Dragon Rage. Okay, so for AoE, I'm going to Dragon Rage here right after my Deep Breath. You don't have to use the Deep Breath immediately though. I'm just going to do it on this example. So yeah, Dragon Rage into a rank 1 Fire Breath, and this is going to have the Tyranny buff, right? So I'm going to have the full effect of my Mastery this whole time. So I'm just going to use a rank 1 on the first one. We're going to use a rank 2 Eternity Surge since there's 4 targets. And then we're just going to start throwing out Pyres. And with the Volatility talent, every single time your Pyres bounce, it actually causes a causality buff. So you get a 1 second reduction on Eternity Surge every single time it bounces, which means that RNG willing, you can actually get some pretty insane cooldown reduction on an Eternity Surge, which means that you can get some pretty insane Dragon Rage uptime during AoE. In fact, I've had cases where like with Lust and PI, I was able to have it go for like 64 seconds. But yeah, basically you're just throwing out Pyres. Use Azure Strike as your builder for Essence Burst, and then use Living Flame if you've got the Leaping Flames buff, since it'll give you 2 Essence Bursts. Use Fire Breath with Tip the Scales on your second one, and use level 2 Eternity Surge every time. And other than that, just pretty much rip everything on cooldown, and try to end your cooldown with 2 Essence Bursts. The best thing about causality is, you know, like we were saying before with the cooldown reduction, if you get lucky with Lust procs early on from your 4-piece, you can actually have a really, really, really nice Dragon Rage in AoE, even without Lust being upright, because you'll just generate the Lust yourself. So yeah, it's a bit RNG, but it can definitely either be really, really good or, you know, decent. Either way, though, it's going to be probably better than most classes, aside from Demon Hunter. So I was hoping to go more in depth with this video, but it turns out I actually have COVID. I tested positive like 2 days ago, and this video is taking way longer than I thought it would. So I'm going to just have to expand on this in a future video. What I'm going to do is just show the rotation from the Wowhead guide in terms of like what you do outside of cooldowns. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And then we'll just expand more on like the advanced concepts in a future video. So once again, apologies. I know that this video doesn't quite meet the standards of like my normal guides, but you know, unfortunately I did get COVID like 3 days before the expansion release. So, you know, it's not ideal. I'm 3 days in right now, taking medicine, feeling okay. But yeah, I won't let this ruin my launch. Shadowlands launches in about an hour right now. So yeah, we're hanging in there. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this guide. If you want to see more of this content, be sure to subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like. And then in the future, hopefully you'll see my future content and, you know, more videos about Evoker and Mage coming very soon.
All right, thank you so much. Have a good one, and we'll see you in Dragonflight.